Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show on this Veterans Day, November 11th, 2022. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a special partnership with Alaska Public Media. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide in this broadcast, you can go to weather.gov. It is the National Weather Service's online presence, and it'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. And if you point and click anywhere on that map, it'll bring up forecasts as well as any relevant watches and warnings, advisories for anywhere in the country. Looking at the map this afternoon in the wake of Hurricane Nicole, the system has since been downgraded to a tropical depression and has weakened further. There are some flood watches and advisories, warnings in western portions of North Carolina. That's about it. Further west, cold air has penetrated down into the southern plains. There are freeze advisories in effect for portions of Oklahoma and Texas, and further north, some of the first early season lake effect snows there downwind of Lake Superior in the Upper Peninsula and in parts of northwest Wisconsin. Here in Alaska, though, we are expecting heavier coastal rains and some mountain snows along portions of the northwestern and north central Gulf Coast this weekend. There have been some reports of ice jams in some of the smaller rivers and creeks in the Anchorage Bowl and Mat-Su valleys, and with warming temperatures this weekend, it could cause that ice to break up and cause little minor flooding along some of these smaller streams. High winds are going to pick up tonight into Saturday along the central Alaska Range, especially in some of the gaps and passes as a result of these weather systems that are impacting the region. And an area of snow will develop from southwest interior up through the northeast, and look for some steadier light snow through the course of the weekend that could add up to several inches in some areas. Looking at the FAA webcams this afternoon, Bettles there is one of those spots that could see the snows develop. They'll tend to pick up during the day on Saturday into Saturday night. Temperature there this afternoon 10 above, but warmer air aloft is coming in, and when you bring the warm air in and over the colder temperatures near the surface, it produces clouds and often precipitation. Summit there in the central Alaska Range, winds are going to be developing, higher winds gusting at times 60, 70 miles an hour late tonight, and especially going through the day on Saturday. Temperatures should also rise a bit there, currently sitting at 28. In the Willow area and the lower Mat-Su Valley, there have been reports of some ice jams on Willow Creek late this week, and we expect as temperatures rise, as that ice has a tendency to want to break up, there could be a few more ice jams in through the Mat-Su Valley as well as the Anchorage Bowl. And then Seward, rain and wind will be increasing. We expect periods of moderate to heavy rain through the course of the weekend from Seward on up through Whittier and Cordova. As much as 4 to 6 inches of rain could fall over the next 2.5 days. So areas that are under advisories and warnings, we have the high wind warning for the central Alaska Range, a wind advisory on the downside, the downslope or north side of that, because we expect south-southeast winds that could gust as high as 60 to 70 miles an hour in through the central Alaska Range. And then a winter weather advisory. This would be as we go through Saturday, especially Saturday night into Sunday. We're just expecting a band of mainly light snow, persistent light snow to set up over the weekend. So a couple days total, we could be looking at 3 to 6, 3 to 7 inches of snow extending from Grayling on up through Anvik, Galena, Bettles to Arctic Village, picking up that light snow in the interior where the colder air is going to hang on longer. Looking at the satellite imagery, you can see the curl in the clouds there. We have a low center just on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, an occluded front working its way east, pushing toward the western Gulf, and a stream of moisture lifting from the North Pacific across the Gulf up into the northern Gulf Coast, and that will be enhanced by yet a secondary low that forms as that occluded front works its way eastward. And we're expecting yet another impulse on Sunday to lift out of the North Pacific, kind of a compact low that'll push into the western Gulf later Sunday, and that will enhance the precipitation once again. So Again, we expect these systems to kind of be sitting there over the southwestern part of the state and the moisture riding northward, taking aim especially along areas of the Gulf Coast. This afternoon, low pressure is situated on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, southeast corner of the Bering, 978 low, with an occluded front extending east. Moisture streaming ahead of that front. We expect the rains to be picking up there along the western and north central Gulf as we go through this evening and tonight. The low will kind of split, a little offshoot of that, working its way eastward up toward Kodiak Island as we go into Saturday morning, with the occluded front pushing further east. That feature just kind of washes out, but it is going to send milder air northward up Cook Inlet, and that's what's going to allow temperatures perhaps in Anchorage by later tomorrow afternoon into Saturday evening. Temperatures could get around or just above 40 in through the Anchorage Bowl. And back to the north and west along the trough in the interior, we're going to see a band of light snow extending from the southwest interior all the way up to the southeastern quadrant there of the Brooks Range, where we anticipate that snow to hold, just continue on and off there through the day on Sunday, as another low is sitting there in the western Gulf, enhancing moderate to heavier rainfall along the coast in the north central Gulf, with some heavier snows, especially up there through the mountains. Temperatures tonight in the Panhandle will generally stay above freezing, with the exception up towards Skagway and White Pass. Temperatures flirting with freezing, steady to even slowly rising Anchorage southward. And then as we go through Saturday afternoon, temperatures will be rising in south central areas up through the Mat-Su Valley. We're looking at 40, maybe even lower 40s into Anchorage by Saturday late afternoon or evening. Temperatures in the Panhandle above freezing, upper 30s to lower 40s. Sunday morning lows may not get much below freezing in the Anchorage area. Along the Panhandle, we expect temperatures there to generally stay above freezing, and even milder temperatures across a broad area of the region. Widespread 40s through the Panhandle up through south central, including Anchorage south down through the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak. Across the north, single digits above and below zero for the North Slope, Yukon flats, upper teens near 20 elsewhere, especially in through the West Seward Peninsula. Warmest temperature Saturday afternoon will be downslope of the Alaska Range. Just south there of Fairbanks, we're looking at Nananas, 36 degrees. Nome 27, and then Sunday morning lows a little slightly better there and through the North Slope and east central interior, the single digits above 0 to around 10 above. And then Sunday afternoon, again, some temperatures on just immediately the downslope side of the Alaska Range could get above freezing. Saturday morning, southwest interior below freezing, but readings above freezing creeping up the Alaska Peninsula. Saturday afternoon highs will get up at least in the lower 40s, say at King Salmon, and up through Kodiak, extending back through the Aleutians. Sunday morning lows still below freezing there up through the lower Yukon and Kuskokwim basins. The warmest air will be east up through the western portion of the Gulf and creeping upward through Cook Inlet. The temperature outlook 6 to 10 day November 17th through the 21st. This includes the weekend before Thanksgiving. We expect above normal temperatures across much of the mainland. Temperatures 30s and 40s, and precipitation averaging above normal in the southwest, however below normal across the Panhandle, especially in the south.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Here is your aviation weather if you have a flight planned over this weekend, Saturday or Sunday. A couple of weather features we're going to really be watching. We have a low that'll be sitting on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula in the southeast corner of the Bering. Occluded front extending eastward with a secondary low there and through the western Gulf. Later in the weekend, we'll have a compact low lift out of the North Pacific up into the western Gulf, which will bring another round of some moderate to heavier precipitation along areas of the Gulf Coast. As we look through the southwest interior up to the south side of the Brooks Range, there will be a trough of low pressure there across the interior, bringing periods of light snow that will add up over time through the course of the weekend. It will also create IFR conditions with the falling snow, lower ceilings, and visibilities. So Saturday morning, IFR conditions are rather widespread southwest Alaska Peninsula into areas of the northern and central Gulf. For Saturday afternoon, you can see that trough figure there in through the southwest, extending up to the south side of the Brooks Range beneath an area of pretty much steadier light snow. And then to the east, we see IFR conditions along the northern Gulf Coast into the northern Panhandle. Sunday morning, that trough feature with the snow falling along it showing up again, extending a little further north into the central north slope and even along the eastern Arctic coast. And then a broad area of IFR conditions along the Gulf Coast from the eastern Kenai, Prince William Sound throughout much of the Panhandle. And Sunday afternoon, we expect IFR conditions to continue across areas of the southwest into south central up to the Alaska Range and then eastward into the northern Panhandle and down through the central Gulf. And looking at past conditions on Saturday, as we would expect with that moisture and that trough, Anaktuvuk Pass, IFR conditions, as will Adigan Pass. Further south and west, look for Lake Clark and Merrill passes to go from MVFR falling down to IFR conditions. And for Rainy Pass, MVFR conditions will deteriorate to IFR conditions during the daytime Saturday. Windy Pass will try to hold on to MVFR conditions. I would anticipate further south of there. IFR conditions eventually developing as some of that moisture spreads further northward from Cook Inlet as we go through Saturday night into Sunday. Isabel Pass, MVFR conditions expected to generally hold. Mentasta may see VFR conditions early Saturday giving way to some MVFR conditions, especially down along the south entrance. And Tanita Pass, generally, we'll be looking at MVFR conditions on Saturday. And then Portage Pass, it's going to be a split. The east entrance and areas over Prince William Sound and surrounding that area, IFR, but the west entrance being MVFR. And Chilkoot and White will see MVFR conditions early Saturday give way to IFR conditions there across the northern Panhandle as we go through the daytime on Saturday. Freezing levels, the surface freezing line runs along the southwest coast there just north of Bristol Bay, up into north of Anchorage to much of the Panhandle, seeing the surface freezing line there, areas south of that above it. And then overall, freezing levels aloft, 2,000 feet there out through the northern Gulf and extending. You have to go way south to the North Pacific Gulf interface to see freezing levels of 4,000 feet aloft. And with the moisture streaming northward, we expect considerable moderate icing possible along areas of the Gulf Coast extending into the coastal mountains and also areas of the western arm of the Alaska Range and just west of there with that trough, with that area of light snow that develops and just spreads northward to south of the Brooks Range. And that we're expecting icing generally above 4,000 and 5,000 feet in these areas. And then the upper level jet stream winds are going to be strongest from the southwestern Gulf down toward the North Pacific. Southwest winds aloft at 30,000 feet, upwards to 120 knots. And looking at 700 millibars, 9,000 feet, a broad area of some stronger winds pushing across the Alaska Range, Mat-Su Valley, Talkeetna Mountains, upwards of 45 to 55 knots, and then a broad area of 50 to as high as 80 knot winds from the lower Gulf down into the North Pacific, southeast of Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula. And then finally at 3,000 feet, we see a low pressure circulation there on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula in the southeast corner of the Bering. Broad area of 40-45 knot winds out of the northeast from the lower Chukchi down across St. Lawrence and Nunavik Islands. And then a wind max upwards of 50 to 75 knots there from the southwest Gulf down into the North Pacific. So we expect considerable moderate turbulence along the Gulf back through the southwest, including Kodiak Island, and then an area also from the lower Chukchi down through St. Lawrence and Nunavik Islands.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission, GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limmendisk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time, compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean, to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and let's start out the marine segment with the sea ice edge, as we usually do, and we see the ice expanding there across the Arctic coast, as well as along the Russian coast. The shore-fast ice is also further developing there, southwest of AKwx down through Cape Lisburne, and we're starting to see the ice also expand a bit there in Kotzebue as well as Norton Sounds. Further south along the Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas, we are seeing the ice also growing there, at least the shore-fast ice. Areas of Cook Inlet, ice really not taking that much hold, and we do have a push of milder air coming up Cook Inlet this weekend that could put temperatures at 40 degrees. So that will definitely slow, if not at least completely stop any ice development down that way. In fact, we have an overall warmer pattern on the way for much of the mainland and especially south central areas coming up here next week. So Saturday's marine forecast for the Panhandle: south-southeast winds 20-25 knots, could gust as high as 40-knot gales in through Lynn Canal with waves running 4 to 5 feet. Inner channels, outer channels, look for south winds anywhere from 25 knots south of Craig to as high as 35 knots up toward Yakutat, and waves generally running 15 to 19 feet. On Sunday, winds will be out of the east-southeast, 20 to 25 knots for the inner channels, gust up to 40 knots, Lynn Canal, waves again 4 or 5 feet. Outer coast, winds will continue out of the south, 20 knots Craig through Sitka, 25 to 30 knots, especially northwest of Gustavus and west of Yakutat, with waves generally running 14 to 16 feet. For the northwestern Gulf, winds will be out of the south, 30 to 35 knots off the Kenai and east of Kodiak Island in the open waters of the northwestern Gulf, waves running 14 to 16 feet. In Prince William Sound, southeast winds to 30 knots, 6-foot waves, and south winds through lower Cook Inlet to 30 knots with waves 8-9 feet. On Sunday, winds will be easterly in Prince William Sound, 25 knots, 6-foot waves. Off the Kenai coast, southeast to east winds 25-30 knots with waves of 13 to 14 feet. And then look for northeast winds coming down along Cook Inlet with waves of 4 to 5 feet. On Saturday, around Kodiak Island, 35-knot gales east of the island over the open waters of the Western Gulf with waves just over 20 feet. As we pull back toward the southern end of the peninsula, 35-knot southwesterly gales with waves upwards to 19 feet south of Sand Point and 13 feet north of Cold Bay. On Sunday, winds fall off in Shelikof Strait, 10 knots, variable 2-foot waves. Winds along the Pacific side of the peninsula, southwest 15 to 20 knots, waves 11 to 12 feet. A mix of winds there from Bristol Bay down toward north of Cold Bay, 20 to 25 knots, and waves 9 to 10 feet. Across the Aleutians, Saturday winds will generally be out of the west, 35-knot gales on the far eastern Aleutians, falling off to 20-knot winds once you get west of Atka and Adak. Waves will generally run 13 to 17 feet on the North Pacific side and 12 to 16 feet on the Bering side. For Sunday, winds turn more northerly across the eastern and especially central Aleutians, and they'll speeds pick up to 25 to 30 knots there west of Nikolsky through Atka and Adak, with waves generally running 10 to 15 feet either side. And then along the southwest coast, we're going to have north to northeast offshore flow, 35-knot gales south of St. Lawrence down through St. Matthew and north of St. Paul. Waves running 13 to 14 feet there. North winds 30 knots, 6-foot waves in Norton Sound. And then on Sunday, a continuation of similar winds, 30-knot winds from the north in Norton Sound, 6-foot waves, but 35-knot gales south of St. Lawrence and northwest of Nunavik Island, 30-knot north winds with waves of 12 to 13 feet from St. Matthew down through St. Paul. And along the Arctic coast, southwest, west winds 15 to 20 knots with ice in place east of Utqiagvik. As we go through the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait, winds turn northerly and accelerate 25 upwards to 35 knots on the north side of St. Lawrence with waves of 7 to 9 feet. And on Sunday, winds generally north-northwest there along the Arctic coast, and northerly winds in the lower Chukchi Sea, 20 to 25 knots, accelerating to 35 knots along the north side of St. Lawrence Island, with waves of 4 to 5 feet in the lower Chukchi Sea and as high as 9 feet on the north side of St. Lawrence. Have a great weekend, everyone.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.